My name is Toby, and these are the 9 principles of body efficiency training. And this is number 4, elastic recoil. And this is all to do with the tendons and the ligaments. You see, what I'm trying to do is not so much use the muscles, but use the joints. And the joints are controlled by the ligaments and the tendons. Now, we all must have done this little thing here. If you flex your fingers back, your wrist back, and really stretch it back and then let go, it flicks forward. And you can do it with the fingers too. Take a finger, pull it back and then let go, it flicks forward. Now, this is elastic recoil. What you're doing is stretching out the tendons and then letting them bounce back. And even here with the elbow, if you collapse your arm further, push it down further, if you hyperextend your elbow and then let go, it springs forward. And you can see this is going to be very useful in martial arts. And this is what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to create this elastic recoil in the ligaments. And the ligaments and the tendons are much more elastic than the muscles. Now here you can see I'm doing the shoulder. Keeping the elbow locked out, I'm pulling the arm back, really stretching the shoulder back, and then letting go, and the shoulder wants to bounce forward. It's an elastic recoil in the shoulder joint. Now I'm trying to do it just manually. I've got to pull the shoulder back hard as I can, really increase that level of mobility, and then suddenly let go, and it wants to spring forward. You see, the trick is to create this elastic recoil by yourself. You've got to pull your joint back, so it's as if one side of the joint is pulling against the other side of the joint. And you do it here with the spine. Arch back. You just see, really arch back, try and pull yourself back and then let go. You spring forward a little bit. You've got to create this elastic recoil. If you can do this, it's very, very efficient indeed. You start to learn how to move when you relax. You see, it's the letting go of that spring that lets you move. It's not tension, it's a recoil. In other words, you do a bit of tension before. Now you can see here with a twist through the spine. You see, if I take one hand like a fist and use the other hand to push it back, but I've got a nice tall spine, and again you've got to look back at the previous principles. I'm doing all those things, and then I'm letting go and springing forward. So I twist the spine, twist the shoulder, stretch the shoulder back, create a stretch in the body, and this is spring loading the joints, it's spring loading the tendons, and then let go and it springs forward in an arc. So you can clearly see how this can be used to create power in the punch. It's extremely efficient power. You can think of it like a crossbow. Your crossbow, you pull the string back, it's held back, and then you suddenly let go and it springs forward. So your body becomes like a bow and your fist is like an arrow flying out from this spring. Now let's have a look at the legs. So to do that, we'll sit down here and then you grab the toes and pull the toes back. Now same thing we did with the wrist. Just keep a straight leg, pull back and then let go, and you'll see it flicks forward. And the further you can stretch back, you've got to relax your foot so you can really stretch the ankle and then let go. You see the power in the spring. It's very powerful. But we want to convert this force all the way down the whole leg. So you need to look back at the previous principle, the concertina effect. I'm trying to push this force through my whole leg right through to the hip joint and collapse it in this concertina. In other words, when I push my toes back, I want that force to go all the way through to my hip joint, and I've got to feel my hip joint projecting back as well. So I'm creating a stretch in the ankle and the hip and then letting that go. See, I've got to create this elastic recoil. So now I'm doing it by helping myself, pulling the toes back and pulling the hip back. It's all to do with the angle. I've got to get the angle right. So this is where you've got to experiment. Pull the toes at a particular angle towards the shin bone, but there's a line that goes to the shin, to the hip, to the thigh rather, and to the hip. So I'm pulling through that line. Again, look at the concertina effect where I talk about that more. But here what I'm talking about is the stretch, the elastic recoil in the tendons. And if you can get it to the hip, even the hip springs forward, and you can clearly see a powerful kick. But I'm doing no effort, there's no work in this kick. It's all to do with the stretch in the tendons and the release in that stretch. It's quite literally a bow and arrow. And this of course relates to the squat. And if you look at again the concertina effect, it's all about the squat. But now as I squat down, I'm creating elastic recoil. Just like I was doing on the floor there, I've got to create a stretch in my ankles, a stretch in my hip. And what I'm doing low down is really feeling that stretch. And that stretch wants to recoil, and that makes me jump up. So this is how you do it. You drop the knees over the toes first of all, so you really feel a stretch in the ankle, and you'll feel the pressure on the knee. Then you take the pressure off the knee by projecting the hips backwards. And the lower you go, the more you project the hips backwards and you stretch out the ankles. You see the toes go towards the shin bone, keeping a neutral spine. And then to get up, the hips have got to go up a little bit first. You see, first of all, I project the hips upwards, and then I can push my toes into the ground. I've got to take this a bit slow. Because the hips have dropped below the knees, you need to lift them up a little bit first. Drop your weight forward, and then you bounce up. And you bounce up using the recoil in the tendons, in the ligaments. You see, you create this elastic recoil in the ankles and the hips, and then you rise up first with the hips and then second with the ankles, and then keep that full movement as you go up. Now, I'm not going for height. I'm not trying to jump too high. I'm going for ease. I'm trying to do this without any effort, just bounce up. But if you want to go for a high jump, this is the same technique you need to use, but you need to add some force as well, which I'm going to talk about in the next principle. But let's have a look at the shoulder here. So now I've got a forward punch into the wall, keeping a neutral spine, and I'm driving my body into the wall with a slight twist, but letting the shoulder stretch backwards. I'm keeping a straight elbow, so I'm creating this stretch in my shoulder joint, the scapula and the rib cage. And then all I'm doing is letting this stretch recoil. I'm bouncing it back. I'm trying to let this stretch, this recoil, just like a bow and arrow, bounce my body weight into the wall and push myself back. So this is done again without any effort. It's extremely efficient, but it takes a bit of practice. And then you can see me here controlling it. But what I'm doing again is isolating the shoulder a bit, but in time you can see here even the elbow has started to bend. But I need to understand also how to use the elbow joint so that I create this resistance, this elastic recoil in the elbow. I'll leave a link below to some videos I talk about the elbow joint. But I need to keep a good structure. Always remember, first is a neutral spine. Second, try and get a good structure in the arms and legs. Again, see the previous two principles for that. And once you've got that, now I'm creating an extra stretch. I'm spring loading the joints, creating this elastic recoil and using the elastic recoil to create force through the body. Now with the legs, again, I've got a horse riding stance here. This is a neutral stance, but you can see both legs, I've got to create this concertina through the legs. Once I've got that, now one leg against the wall. But again, I've got to even out both legs perfectly. I've got a stretch in the ankle and a stretch in the hips. The hip joint is projected back and both legs are collapsing in this concertina, one in the wall, one into the ground. And now I'm trying to create this elastic recoil through the legs to create force. And this, of course, is the side kick, but it's the effortless side kick. I'm using elastic recoil, and you can see the bounce at the end. Now you can try it with the front kick. It's the same as we were doing sitting down. So this is a front pushing kick. But you see, I'm holding the leg up, pulling the toes back towards the hips. So the toes go to the shin goes to the leg, and the leg pushes the hip, stretches the hip joint back. And then I let it flick out. And you can see I'm kicking forward with elastic recoil. There's no work. I'm creating a stretch in the joints, a stretch in the ligaments, and then letting that release. Quite literally a bow and arrow. And try both legs, of course. Now again, you see the structure is important. Even when I pull the leg up, I've got to create a balance in the supporting leg and try and keep a neutral spine. This will all help because ultimately the whole body's got to connect together, and I've got to create this spring load effect through the whole body, not just the leg. At the moment here I'm trying to demonstrate different isolated methods, but now you can see here with a punch, this is really a whole body. So you can see I've got the structure in the legs, the structure in the spine. I start the movement off in the legs, take a twist through the spine, but I stop the fist. You see, imagine I've got a wall here. I can't punch any further, but with my body I try to punch, and that creates a stretch in the shoulder joint, a stretch through the rib cage, and this is spring loading the whole body, and then I let go. So this is the two parts to the punch. I build up the bow and arrow. First I stretch the bow, stretch the bow, feel it across the spine, and then I release the arrow. It flies out. This is elastic recoil directly into martial arts, and I do another video about that in the overhand cross punch. Again, I'll leave links below to that video. Now here you can see using it in the legs, the stance, fighting stance. Now again, I've got a neutral stance but 3/4 forward, just twisting slightly to the front. But both my legs, I've got to use this concertina effect, spring load the ankle and the hip, and then bounce. So you can see I'm shuffling forward and backwards, skipping forward and backwards, but it's effortless. I'm using the bounce, the recoil, the elastic recoil in the ankles and the hips. And now notice it's not too much work in the knees. The knees are actually not taking too much pressure. It's the ankles and the hips. You see, the knees are the weakest point. You've got to be very careful of the knees. The ankle, the Achilles tendon, is the strongest tendon, and the hip joint, of course, the glutes, these are the strongest muscles. So they're fine. The knee, you have to be careful. Don't twist the knee, don't overwork the knee. You've got to use the hips and the ankles much more. And you can see me here trying to bounce out side kicks. And what I'm trying to do is create the elastic recoil in my legs and then release it into a stretch. So there's two parts to this. You see, if you think about it, mostly people strike with tension. You tense up as you hit. What I'm trying to do is use the tension before. You see, I'm creating a stretch. I am tensing one side of my body to stretch out the other side of my body. And then I let go of the tension and the other side bounces forward. It releases. So I'm using relaxation at the point of the strike. Now what I'm trying to do is do a little bit of random movement, moving around a bit like martial arts. Again, it's just totally freestyle. You can even think of this as dancing, but I'm trying to create large movements, stretching movements, so I'm winding up one movement to relax into another movement. In other words, one move winds up the spring, one move spring loads, and then the second move releases. I create a bow and arrow. One move becomes a bow, the other move becomes the arrow. And this is very efficient in martial arts because you want to move one move to the next, and each move winds up the power for the following move. Okay, I hope this made sense. Please do check out the previous principles of this because they all lead up to this one, and stay tuned for the next principle, principle number 5, coming very soon. Thank you so much for watching and have a great day.